Hello. Once again, we are attempting to do a live stream where people can call in and ask questions. With my experience, I'm happy to share what I know directly to whatever question you might ask. But in the meantime, I thought I might talk about electrical work. My dad, what a neat guy. He was a good father. He was a union electrician. So believe me, he has specific ways that you should do things, particularly with quality. Traveled, we had a home in the country in Arkansas, in Deer, Arkansas, Deer, like the legs and everything. Matter of fact, the basketball team, which is the only thing they had, didn't have a baseball or a football team. The basketball team was called the Deer Antlers. Anyway, we had a house in a very rural area. It's below Harrison, which is up in the mountains below, and the third highest point in the Boston Range, actually. So it was hard to make money. And he was used to working as an electrician. I think he worked on Anheuser-Busch, where they made beer. In Houston, Texas, he worked on other union jobs. Everything was done by the book. So my dad was doing electrical work way before I was born. Or at least at the same time that I was coming up. And we moved into the northwest corners, maybe even central Arkansas, north central, when I was 8. And so he had a hard time making a living as an electrician in that area because that's an impoverished area. Still, of course, everybody's better now. But they had people in the phone book. One guy's name in the phone book was Crazy Darby. That was his name in the phone book. So my dad would have to travel to the larger cities like Buffalo, New York, Rochester, New York, and he would go and work for 6 weeks, and we could live off of that for 6 months. And he would try to start up a business. We actually got a floor cleaning business. And he did really well. He worked long hours so he could be close to his family and his wife and kids. So my dad actually taught electrical at the school so the locals would have a little bit of knowledge if they wanted, as a benefit for the community, the rural areas. And he taught electrical there. But my dad was very capable with heavy switchgear. And here we are in a very rural area where that skill was really not needed, or certainly not going to be paid for like he would need to support his family. So we had to do other things. But because of that, later on in life, my dad, we moved to East Texas. Of course, I traveled, as we all traveled as a family quite a few times. I went to 13 schools or in 9 years. Well, quite a few. And that was good for me. Might not be good for others, but it was good for me because it taught me to be on my own. But it was because we were following his union jobs. And he didn't always take us with him. Like I say, he went he went to Buffalo, New York, and he was talking about how it was so cold that he was chewing bubble gum so he could push it in the holes that were whistling the wind through the bottom of the car or the dash of the car, and he was pushing bubble gum in those holes to keep it from freezing him. And he would take all the dangerous work in those places, the hazard pay and the long hours, so he could build up the money to come back to. So we learned all this. He expected us boys to learn from him, and he had union teaching. about quality and taking your time to do it right, make it look good. So I will be sharing with you some kind of balance between that and what a customer may want in a camper or a mobile home or in a high-end house. So in a lot of ways, when I explain to people that are working for me, I tell them in a lot of ways electrical is similar to plumbing. And they're, what? Because they understand plumbing. You got supply, and then you got a drain. So it's similar in electrical in that you have supply, which would be your hot, and then you have your neutral, and of course they add a ground. But that supply and neutral, the neutral takes the excess. That's where your alternating current comes now. Now with and believe me, electrical can go. You can have this discussion for many, many days. You can have courses, and there are schools that teach you how to be an electrician, and then you go out and learn even more. So I will just kind of roll over it like I do with the guys that work with me. Is that you have to have a neutral if you're going to supply power. The excess electricity needs to go through. The exception to that is a switch. Now, the switch may have a ground, so that if it, gets a little electrical to the body of the frame of that electrical switch, it doesn't shock you. It'll just short out directly to ground and trip the breaker. But the neutral is not connected to a switch. And that was a little bit of a challenge in my mind early when I was young. I was like, oh yeah, you don't need to pull a neutral. And a lot of times that neutral, like plumbing, it can share multiple circuits can serve on the same neutral or same drain, the excess. The exception to that is when you start doing three-phase. You can put a neutral on the, a hot on the wrong phase. That's not something that we need to talk about. That's we start getting into details like that. But what I want to explain though is that you honestly have a supply and you have a neutral. Now with your stoves and I believe your dryers now, you actually have two hots, which is 220, 110 on each leg, a neutral and a ground, which is truly confusing, but they effectively go to similar places. And I know I get these people like, oh no, the ground goes to a different place. Okay, but when it goes out to the pole, it goes into the ground. Okay, it's where it connects. So when you're doing electrical, your key thing is tight connections. And I believe it was mobile homes in the 70s, maybe even late 60s. They used aluminum wiring to save money, which, by the way, they still use aluminum wiring because we couldn't afford copper entry wire, which is about as big as your thumb. It's exceptionally expensive as copper. So we're still using aluminum. What happened was loose connections on outlets caused arcing, and it can still do that with copper. But aluminum it expands and contracts more than copper does. As a matter of fact, when you use aluminum even now on your service entrance, it behooves you to put what you call OxyGuard, or a grease that you put on there to keep the aluminum from corroding and therefore causing it to arc. And that arcing causes it to burn, swell up and heat up faster, and can cause a bad connection. Bad connections can cause you to have a fire. That would mean that outlet or that switch ends up corroding really bad because of that constant expanding and contracting. When you're not using it, it contracts. It's not heated up. expands when it gets hot. So the more loose that connection is, the more that heat builds up, and eventually it burns out the outlet. Typically, a lot of people in low end houses, they don't replace the outlets because they might not even know that they have to. Oh, there's something wrong with that one. Don't use that. We're going to run an extension cord from another one because it gets worn. But you really should replace those. And say your heat's not working good, or you can't afford the propane, so you plug in an electric heater, and that draw from that electric heater is massive. Or when we talk about that extension cord, you plug into that outlet and then you put a 6-way on it, and then you run multiple cords off of that because you only got one outlet that's in the room. Really loads up that outlet and that circuit. Well, in mobile homes that had that aluminum wiring, they end up with a class action lawsuit because there were a lot of houses that were burning because of those loose connections. I, to this day, have seen electrical in those houses in aluminum, and they don't burn, but I'm sure some did. And invariably, what you have to do is go in there and either replace the outlet or at least tighten up the screws that hold those wires or the wire nuts that hold them all together. And so aluminum wiring was decided not to use that inside of the house. Running the main service to the house, aluminum is fine. Now they're using, in mobile homes, they use the 2 hots, a neutral, and a ground. Just what they decided to do. For 40, 50 years, it wasn't necessary. You just had 2 hots and a neutral, and you had a ground off of the house. Well, now you got the ground off the house, and you got a ground on the pole, and you got a ground that goes from the panel to the service out there, the meter can connected to it. What they're trying to do is be extra safe. Now, I'm not going to speak about the different types of 3-phase, delta and Y delta, and so on, because the common person is who I try to talk to. I'm not trying to get into switchgear or at this point, I'm still learning about solar and DC work. So what we're talking about is regular house wiring, or maybe a shop that you have, or grocery stores and things like that I've worked on. That gets into switchgear when you start getting into larger. And my dad became an electrical contractor when I was in my early 20s. And I came to work for him, and we did Safeways. And it was a crash course on how to do things right, how to bend pipe. And I was never as good as my brother Tim, or later on my brother Rodney at electrical. I was a functional electrician, and I got a lot of work done because I worked hard at it. No playing around at that age for me. I was just bulldogging it out. So yes, I got a crash course in electrical contracting and doing electrical work. We also did apartment complexes, which is still sort of commercial, and it was wood framing, but it's different than what you would do in offices and shopping centers and grocery stores in particular. All that is in conduit. So in houses, where most of you will be interacting with your electrical work, and mind you, all the things that I'm sharing with you is not that you have to do it, but if you have the knowledge of how it's supposed to be done, then you know when somebody's working for you, what they're doing. So it's sort of like understanding that the mechanic is not lying to you. You understand that what the journeyman is saying, if it's a journeyman electrician. You have a little bit of an idea about what so he doesn't just lie to you. It's strength in knowledge. Knowledge is power, as you might say. So the electrical work that you'll be doing mostly is 110. The exceptions will be your stove. Say you have a central heat and air. You might have 220 if you got electrical. For sure you're going to. Your dryer, things like that. But most of it's going to be 110 outlets, switches, and breakers. It is very important that you should keep an eye on when it's the outlet, you plug in something into it and it just falls out. That outlet is getting wore out. It's probably time to hire somebody, or just turn the breaker off, have your little tester make sure it's off, and replace it yourself. And whenever you start having bad connections, say you might hear a little bit of a buzzing noise because it's had a load on it for quite a long time. Might be time to think about replacing that breaker or those connections to that outlet. Now they have arc fault breakers and arc fault outlets. Real expensive. And it's leaving the KISS principle behind, which is keep it simple, stupid. But some of the newer houses will have arc fault. And it's not necessary. But these have an extra thing in case somebody, like a child, sticks something into the outlet. In theory, it will trip real easy. But what happens is it trips exceptionally easy and wears out, and and it's real expensive. Like $20 for a breaker where it would have been $6, and $5 for an outlet where it would have been 75 cents a dollar. Either way, they both function. They both have the same principles. You need to have tight connections, and the wire nuts need to be tight. And all those things can come loose by just the fact that when it is under load, or when they say you got an outlet plugged into it, or a heater plugged into the outlet, I should say, that causes those wires to swell up just a little bit. And then when you get through using it, say it turns off, or say the window unit, the compressor kicks on, they put a load on that outlet, and then when the compressor kicks off, that outlet cools back down. That wire is expanding and contracting. It's not much, but after a while it gets to be. So it's a good idea to get an insulated screwdriver. That's a screwdriver with the plastic on the shaft, and tighten up your screws on the panel cover. And take the panel cover off and get in there and tighten up the screws on the wires. That's an easy thing for you to do. And all you got to do is make sure you don't get into it with yourself. That's where you would have that plastic coating on the screwdriver, and that saves you some issue. When it comes to getting inside your switch and your outlets, your plugs, you're going to have to make sure that power's off, and you're going to have a little more confidence, and it'll take a little practice sitting down or standing up with a switch and changing it out. Now you can take a picture of it with your phone, and it can be a little challenging sometimes, like on 3-ways and 4-ways. When you do your journeyman's test, one of the things they ask you to do is to draw out a 3-way switch. That's a challenge. You need to know that if you're going to be a journeyman electrician. It's a good idea. But if you're just doing it for yourself, just take a picture of the way the wires are connected onto that 3-way or that 4-way and put it back the same way. Invariably, your switch might be newer, but it will be the same shape. If it isn't, you bought the wrong one. And you can replace it. The same with the breaker. You would turn the breaker off. FPE breaker. That's a really odd breaker, and they're hard to come by, and they're expensive. But they were around in the 60s and 70s. They had a sharp stab type of bottom on them. But like I say, a lot of times the breakers, like the Murray and several others, they interchange. They're similar. But you take that breaker out, and you can look at it. You can even take a picture of it. That's one of the fantastic things about a phone is you can take a picture with that phone, and you can put that breaker back in. They can have the electrical till you go get your breaker and swap it out. So but you can take that breaker in and get what you need. Sometimes the depth on the slot is different. Sometimes it has prongs that pinch, and the slot slides into it. And some, there are different ones like home line, square D home line, and square D period. They're different. Murray, Siemens, Cutler hammer, on and on. But quite a few of them interchange. So you can take it down there and say, it may not have your brand, but they have something very similar to it, and it's the same length, it's the same hookup on the backside. And so when you put it back in, you hook up on the backside, then you push into the slot that connects the power to the breaker, and then you turn your breaker on after you've hooked up the wire. Before, you want to hook the wire up, tighten it down, and then turn your breaker on. It's time to do a smoke test. See if it starts smoking. But so electrical, it can be nerve-wracking, particularly if you got something that's shorting out a breaker. And so as soon as you turn it on, the breaker will snap or click. So you have something that is causing it to short out. I have seen every kind of thing go wrong. I have seen where people put the wrong wire trying to do the work themselves, put the hot on neutral, neutral on hot. But you can usually get a little electrical tester that you plug into it, and it tells you no neutral or no hot, or neutral and hot reversed, or ground and hot reversed. There's a little plug-in tester. That's one of my favorite things, for finding out what's wrong. Drop neutral. It happens a lot. So you can do that and find out if you got a loose, so if you push on that breaker or that switch and the lights flicker, you got a loose connection inside there. You're going to need to turn that breaker off, open it up, pull it out, make sure it's off, and then start tightening up everything. So a lot of times there'll be a wire nut in there, or there's a lot of outlets and switches that instead of putting it underneath the screw, you can just stab it in the back, which is nothing wrong with that. But those don't have as strong a connection, but that's not a big deal. You can just replace it if it gets bad. And it takes like a little tiny screwdriver to push in a slot above or below, and then you can pull that wire out. What it does is the wire goes in and it connects onto it, so you can't pull it out. But if you push in that slot with a small screwdriver, it pushes it, and then you can pull the wire out. And that's on the back of the plug and the switch. So sometimes you can push on that light switch a little bit, or wiggle it a little bit, and the lights start flickering. You got a loose connection in there somewhere. If it's not connected under a screw, then you got either a connection in the light switch itself, or maybe up there where that light is, somebody didn't quite get it tight enough. I used to have a left-handed. I've had that several times now. I had a left-handed worker. They tighten up the wires left-handed, counterclockwise, and then the wire nuts require them to go right-handed or clockwise, and it would literally twist the wire. So I had to tell them, hey, look, your wire nuts go counterclockwise, so your wire is going to have to be twisted counterclockwise, and then put your wire nuts. So, well, I just put the wires together and stick a wire nut on it. The reason you don't do that is because whenever you're working on it and you don't have those tied together, if you're working when it's hot and all those wires just poof, come out, if they're not twisted together, they will do that. And it can be a really challenging thing. So, and you don't know, sometimes they get in there where you can't get to them, and it's really hard to get to. So you end up, it's a nuisance. So go ahead and twist them together clockwise, and then put your wire nut on it. That connection there can get loose, just like I talk about the plugs and the switches getting loose. When it comes to the main wires coming into your panel, the larger wires, if you want to tighten them up inside your house where the breakers are, you need to go outside and turn the power off at the pole. if you have that ability. And they also make insulated Allen wrenches. Those are usually Allen wrenches, larger Allen wrenches. But you want to be careful. And I'd recommend that you have some practice at being careful before you start doing it. Over and over again, people, plugged in there. They had some family come over and they parked their camper and they got a 50 amp camper and they already got a 200 amp service that's loaded up with a shop and welder and everything out there, an air compressor, and really load up that 200 amp service and loose connections, get up on the pole, start getting hot and swelling up. Remember I told you about the aluminum still being used? Well, guess what? Those connections can get corroded. So you would have to have the power off. You cannot mess with the wire coming down from the pole into the from the meter down into your upper part of your panel. You're going to have to let that alone until they turn the power off. I mean, I have seen it where it needs to be tightened up. And generally, that's not your responsibility. That's the electrical company's responsibility. Also, you need to keep an eye on your neutral connections. You're not just the connections on your breaker, but in the panel, the connections to the neutrals. They go to the same place, and you need to it's a good idea to go down like Harbor Freight and take those insulated screwdrivers and tighten up everything. You got to have a good neutral, or otherwise that current won't flow. So good connections on both the neutral and the hot. So on the breaker and the neutral bus bar needs to be tightened up. And that's something that you can do, but you need to have an insulated screwdriver if you're going to be reaching into a panel. It's a good idea. Now, can you wrap it up with electrical tape? Yes. Can you dip it into a electrical coating? Yes. But it's easier just to go get an insulated screwdriver. It's not that much expense, and you're saving a ton of money if you're doing it yourself by just going and getting the right tools. And you can use that screwdriver for other things. But you use that insulated screwdriver, you're not likely to get jumped into something else. Say somebody skinned the wire too far back, and that's something we need to talk about. Is how far back you need to, like on your outlets, quite often on the back side of that outlet tells you how long you need to strip the wire. Now, if you're putting it around the screws, you're going to bend that wire in a clockwise fashion because you're going to be turning the screw clockwise to tighten it up. And you're going to bend it so it goes around the main part of the screw and then tighten the head of it down on it so that when it's tightening clockwise, your wire's already turned clockwise. Okay? On an outlet, and I've seen this a few times, on each outlet, do you have the ability to separate there's two places where you can plug in. You can separate those. And you can literally put one on a switch and one on regular power. And that was for in case you wanted to put a lamp on that lower one or that upper one, and you have a switch. As soon as you come in, the lamp turns on. And the other one stays on constant power from the other outlets. And so how do you do that? Well, there is a little brass connection that is on the sides that you can break that connection, and that leaves those separate. I have seen it where people didn't know that, and they messed around with it, like, oh, why this got this, and I've had to jump a wire from one end to the other, or it had that ability to switch it, and they didn't know it. That, when you come on, you can turn a light switch on, and the lamp that's supposed to be plugged in there, they didn't have a lamp. They just, hey, that bottom outlet right there by the door, it never has worked. And like, what does this switch do? It's to switch to that outlet. Oh, I didn't even know that. I've been living here for 5 years, didn't know that. So, yes, every outlet has the ability to split the upper from the lower, and you can have it on a separate circuit or separate power. switched power, if you will, on the same circuit, but switched. That gives you that ability. Or if you just want to have one of them for whatever reason on the same circuit as another one, you could do that. That's on your outlets. When it comes to switches, be careful to understand where put everything back the way it came off. Invariably, you're going to be using, most of the time, a single pole switch, which is not a three-way or a four-way. But if you're messing with a three-way or four-way, just take a picture of it, or take note, write it down, which color went to which leg. One of your legs has got a black screw on it. Pay attention to which wire went where and put it back the same way. You'll be okay. When it comes to troubleshooting, now you can get into really brain straining things, because it doesn't have to make sense. A lot of times people put things together, add things to things, and one of the times that I remember more than once now, that a mouse will have chewed on the coating of a wire until it touches, and I literally see the fried mouse in the wall, and these people are totally clean, but this mouse decided to make a home inside the insulation and chew on whatever it finds. As a matter of fact, that's been a problem with people's like, how in the world have I got a swelled up floor in my living room? Invariably it's because the mouse decided to chew on the hot or the cold side of the water that's going to a bathroom on the other end of the house from the kitchen, and the water sprays up and hits the bottom of the floor and swells up the floor. Like, it didn't make any sense. Yeah, that's how it happens. A mouse can do that. Somebody hammering a staple or shooting a staple too far, and it gets into the coating, took a little bit. I've seen that one before. Too much of a load on one circuit, 20 amp or otherwise. Somebody's trying to put, big tools on that circuit, and it loads it up and causes it to have where they have a connection inside the wall, or outlet you didn't know was there on the other side of the wall. It ends up chasing it. Now, the biggest puzzle quite often for a mobile home is that a lot of times the power for the outlets go through the overhead light box. That's not every time, but a lot of times it does. It doesn't have anything to do with the light, other than quite often they'll take the power from that goes to those outlets from there, so they pull in from the breaker to that light box, and it drops off, goes across the ceiling, down the walls, and then around to whatever it can reach. But in order to power the light, what they do is they run a wire, 2-lead wire, over to the light switch. So you got power coming down to the light switch, and then back from the light switch back up to the light to get power. So you've already got a neutral there, and the power is coming down and then back up. Guess what? You go to that, you're up there in that box, and you're like, I got, my light is hooked up on the power side to a white wire with a black piece of tape on it. Or they've messed up. They put a white wire with all the black wires. Well, what they're doing is they're taking a 2-lead wire, hooking it up to the power, which goes down to a switch, and then comes back out of that switch up, and you're powering whatever light you have up there, and you can turn it off and on with a switch. You need to be aware of that. So you might have to take that switch out of the wall or to look in there and see what they did. It's got a black and a white. Oh, well, that means they took a switch leg back up to that light or that fan. Fans can be a challenge. A lot of times what happens on most of these fans is that little switch that they're always pulling the chain on, they wear out. And they get popped, they break off the chain inside, and it goes up inside there, or the nut comes loose and it breaks. you have to turn the power off, and or at least turn your switch off. Make sure you get into it, and you can find out that switch is replaceable. Usually at Lowe's or Home Depot or any hardware store will have that. Uh, Invariably, they'll have some. You might have something that is not available anymore. Fortunately, we have all that stuff available online, but you need to pay attention to the the wires going into your fan. Sometimes those fans are hooked up where the blue wire goes through that fan to a light on the bottom of that fan. But most of the time, people just want to have the ability to turn that fan off and on with their chain and not turn the light on without the fan. But you have that option. That blue wire coming down through there is generally for your lights. But you can hook that blue wire onto the others, and your lights will be turned off and on by a switch. Now, how do you troubleshoot wiring when you have problems? Well, you have to clear your head. There's not a time to be dealing with phone calls and everybody complaining at you. Your little kids running up to you. What are you doing, Daddy? It's time for them to get back so you can pay attention to what you're doing and draw it out on a piece of paper. Power comes in here. I got power here. Now I got another outlet here. There's two wires in here. One comes in, brings power, and it goes over to this other one. How do I know that? Well, if I disconnect it here, there's no power to the rest of the outlets over here. So this one connects all those. You have to break it down step by step. What is the problem? I've got power here. I don't have here. Is there a bad connection back here? Check for bad connections. If not, then you may have to drill a hole through the bottom, and they make a special drill that you can drill through and pull up a wire through the bottom of the box, through your floor, and go underneath and bring it back up. They have fish rods where you can fish it through the wall and across the ceiling. There's a lot of different things, and there's a lot of special tools that electricians they just love to load themselves up with tools. You do not have to have every kind of tool. A pair of lineman pliers, a good set of screwdrivers, maybe even needle nose occasionally, but make sure all the handles are good and insulated when you're messing with electrical. They make wire strippers they're really neat if you're doing a lot of electrical work. Don't cost that much, especially when you consider what you're going to have to pay for an electrician to do work on your place. So just be careful when you do it. Don't let yourself get all distracted by other things and then you forget what you're doing and hook it up wrong. Will you burn your house down? Most likely not. I mean, usually a house gets burnt down, not because somebody hooked it up wrong, but because they loaded up too many things on one circuit, or there was loose connections that they just ignored. I've seen it over and over again. Somebody plug in an extension cord, and then they put a 6-way on there, and then they put two 1,500-watt ceramics heaters, and everything starts burning up. It's like, oh, I burnt up that outlet. I'm going to move over to this outlet, and they burn up that outlet eventually. So having renters and working in other people's houses, you get over there and like, do you have anything behind this piece of cabinet over here? I don't know. So you move the cabinet and there's a outlet there that's got a really wore out connections on it. And, oh yeah, that's right. We quit using that one because it wouldn't run the power. So, you're going to have to break it down, draw it out, figure out which breaker turns off and on. You do not have to turn the whole house off, like I've had to tell one of the guys that works for me. He worked on his own house. He's so scared of electrical, he turns the whole main breaker off. You have no need to do that. A 200-amp breaker can be $40-50, and it's even more challenging to hook up. So don't wear out your main breaker shutting all your house off because you're worried. You can do it, but you don't need to do that. Just figure out which one it is. Have yourself a little tester that lets you. The plug-in tester was really good for that. If you got power to that outlet, it will let you know. And you can buy the little testers at at Harbor Freight or anywhere else online. I think we have some on our website that we're partnered with that I picked out at Amazon that you can purchase that. Anything you find will work fine. You just need to take the time and get your tools together, and they're not that expensive. It'd be less than $30, $40 for most of the good pair of lineman pliers. You're gonna spend a chunk of money, but you don't need a Klein lineman pliers. You're not gonna do that work all the time. Okay, you're just gonna use it so you can get a off-brand that has the same thing, and you can tighten up and cut wires with it. You can strip wires with it. You can get a wire stripper. You don't have to get Ideal or Klein or any of the high end. You can use I think Home Depot stuff is called Commercial Electric. It's a good set that they sell. I think it's like $65, $75, and you get a pretty good size set of tools, maybe $80 now. Works really good. So you might look into that. Having tools like that around, can you just buy them and have them for whenever you need them? Yeah, that's a great idea. But do it when you got the budget to do it. And then can you go and tighten up your own switches and outlets and tighten? Yeah, you can. You can do that and preempt all the problems. See if you got a wire that's burning because it's got too much of a load on it on that outlet. They'll literally be black or brown coming from that outlet because the loose connection causes that wire to heat up, and then it starts trying to melt the coating on the wire. I've seen it where it melted through the box and back into the wall. That's where you get fires. Where somebody said, "Oh, I know a little bit about electrical. Your breaker's tripping on this. We'll put it on this breaker. That is a 20 amp breaker here, but we can put it on a 30. Look, it's working." Now that 20 amp of wire will burn up before that 30 amp, not necessarily, but it could burn up before that 30 amp actually trips. That's when you get sparks dropping down inside the wall, and that dry, worn, or that old wood in there could catch on fire. It literally takes somebody really doing something wrong. Okay, you really have to be something obviously wrong that you're doing to have a fire. I've seen it where they knew that they were having problems with their dryer because they had to wiggle their dryer to get the dryer to work. Well, it was burnt up on the inside of that outlet where that cord plugged into, and they just kept wiggling the wire a little bit when they wiggled the dryer, and it started working. Well, you need to take a look at that or have somebody take a look at that. Don't let those things happen, because then your house can catch on fire from loose connections. Almost always it's loose connections that causes that fire, or too much of a load on that wire that causes the house to catch on fire. Okay? So you can do preemptive things. If you got an older house, you can do one breaker at a time. You do not have to do it all at one time. If you want to, you can, but you don't have to. And you can, if you're hiring somebody to be done, just have them do a room at a time. If they're real expensive, just do it as you can afford it. Hey, come on over, and we'll just replace all the breakers and the switches in this bedroom, or the living room, or the kitchen. Okay? But you can be preemptive about those things. Either doing it yourself or hiring somebody. You should consider, and when it comes to electrical, same as plumbing, consider it a higher quality. You do not have to spend a fortune, but you do not want to buy the cheapest thing you can buy. You don't want to cut corners and put in old wore out outlets and switches when it's only a $1 or so to buy a switch or an outlet. It's not worth saving. You're going to spend more than that on a candy bar or a 2-liter soda or a little bit of cheese or some chips. Just not buy the chips and buy yourself an outlet, and save that money until you buy 4 or 5 outlets and just do it all at one time if you want. But electrical is It's not quite as dangerous as you think it is, and it's more dangerous than you think it is. 110, the problem with 110 is if you get hung up in it, it's kind of hard to get loose. 220 puts more volts, more amperage to you, and it can light you up. 30 amp or something like that, that's pretty good shock. But it's not the same as high voltage, where it starts blowing chunks out of your muscles. Can you die from it? Most assuredly you can die from it. But you need to just be careful, and you won't die. You will be fine. I hope I'm coming across as plain as I can. If there's any questions, you guys are, you can call in anytime you want to and ask questions about electrical. And I don't mind telling you what I have experienced. And I've experienced quite a bit. So I wish you all the best. Hopefully you got something from what I'm telling you. When it comes to brands, don't be too worried about brand. Just get decent quality and do a good job. All right? It's just the way life is. Get decent quality and do a good job. All right, guys, I'll talk to you another time. See you later.